When we start a new playthrough of Cuphead, we will be initially equipped with a basic weapon, the pea shooter, which fires a stream of low damage bullets in the direction we're currently aiming towards. But in each of the Cuphead aisles, there is a shop where we can purchase additional weapons if we want something different. These have all different properties and can help us out in different situations. Roundabout deals decent damage and acts as a boomerang, giving it great range. Charge allows you to build up a powerful attack that we can unleash at a moment's notice. Chaser automatically homes into a target, allowing us to play defensively while still maintaining constant damage. Sprite has a very short range, but deals very high damage. There's also 3 weapons that can be bought in the DLC aisle. There's Crackshot, which has a homing property like Chaser, but is stronger when hit up close. There's Converge, which fires a 3-way shot with bursting properties, very useful for hitting multiple targets. And finally there's Twist Up, which fires bullets that angle upwards. But arguably the best weapon we can purchase is also a pretty unassuming one. So much so that it ends up being used in nearly every speedrunning category, sometimes even playing extra running on stages just to be able to collect it or acquire coins to be able to collect it. This weapon is the Lobber. Today we're going to briefly talk about this weapon and explain just what makes it so good. Suffice it to say, some of it has to do with the design of the weapon itself, but some of the reasons behind this weapon's strength are the result of bugs. First of all, what does the Lobber even do? It is a weapon with a slow fire rate that lobs down, giving it decent range but making it ideal to hit targets that are on the same height as us or below us rather than far high targets. Its damage per second is pretty decent, being the 3rd highest in the game just behind Sprite and Charge. This already gives it a pretty interesting advantage in the form of flick lobbers. Because its fire rate is pretty slow, whenever we're too close to an enemy and need to back off, we can move backwards while charging up its cooldown and then briefly face that enemy again and fire the bullet whenever ready. This is much harder to do with a low cooldown weapon like Spread without constantly wasting some of its cooldown or failing to step away much at all. However, this weapon also comes with a very special property. When this projectile hits a floor, it will bounce. It will bounce for up to a maximum of 3 times, after which it will simply pop upon hitting the floor again and not deal any damage. This makes it a fairly well-rounded weapon, but doesn't sound too groundbreaking on its own. That is, until we realize what its bouncy property actually implies. You see, when we fire the Lobber directly upwards, after it will hit the floor, it will continue to bounce in place, losing more and more height after each bounce, but staying active on screen for a pretty long time. What this allows us to do is to set up Lobber traps. Take for example the root pack. This fight is made up of 3 distinct phases, one against the potato, one against the onion, and one against the carrot. In between each phase, we have a lot of that time, where we have to watch the defeat animation for each of the vegetables and wait for the next one to appear. And here is where the Lobber can truly shine. Instead of just waiting, we can start shooting some Lobbers in place right where the next boss will appear. Once that finally happens, our unsuspecting boss will immediately be hit by a barrage of Lobber bullets, usually dealing several seconds worth of damage. There are several situations like this throughout the run, and needless to say, this really builds up to a ton of time throughout the entire game. This alone makes it a pretty powerful weapon, but this kind of concept isn't exactly unique to the Lobber. With Charge, we can prepare a pretty powerful shot during that times too, and while its damage may be a little bit less than what a big Lobber trap can do, it is a slightly more powerful weapon with a bigger range, making it preferable for long distance situations. So why is the Lobber so much more commonly used in speedruns? Well, part of that answer has to do with the fact that Charge simply costs more in most shops, because we need to purchase other weapons first before being able to acquire it, requiring us to spend more time to acquire the coins needed to purchase it, and often making it not worth the time investment. However, a much bigger part of that answer lies somewhere else. It has to do with its EX move. In this game, we have a super meter in the bottom left that acts as a bit of a mana meter. We can increase it by either pairing a pink object or by simply hitting enemies, and once we've collected enough, it will give us a card we can expend to unleash an EX move, which is a special move that changes depending on the weapon we're currently using. For example, for Spread, it sends out 8 projectiles around Cuphead, that when all combined deal a high amount of damage, making it an ideal move to use inside an enemy hitbox. For Charge, it creates an explosion run in front of us that deals splash damage to anything within its range. For Lobber, it sends out a big explosive sphere that bursts when hitting a floor or an enemy, dealing damage to anything within the range of its explosion. On its own, this doesn't sound like anything too special, and you'd be right. As per design, this is a decent move that deals an average amount of damage, and that's about all it would be if it wasn't for what happens when it hits a floor. Now, note that what I'm about to say only applies to Cuphead versions 1.0 and 1.1, which is what the game's main 80% categories are typically run on. However, a lot of other aspects about the ZX move still apply to the current patch, version 1.3. I will explicitly call out when what I'll be talking about will apply to those newer game versions too. Alright, so by default, hitting a Lobber EX on a boss deals 28 HP of damage. But watch the boss's health bar when we hit the floor right next to the boss with it. Boom! That's 56 HP of damage. What's going on? Well, it looks like our Lobber EX is exploding twice for whatever reason. We can also tell by listening to its sound effect, which is slightly louder than if we were to hit a boss directly with it. The reason why is very interesting. When a projectile interacts with another piece of collision, be that an enemy, a floor, or something else, it will execute different code depending on what type of collision that is. The reason for this is obvious when we consider that these projectiles really do need to behave differently depending on what they're interacting with. If the Lobber is hitting the floor, it needs to make it bounce and send it towards the appropriate trajectory depending on the velocity and direction it had when it hit the ground. If it's hitting an enemy, it needs to immediately destroy it and deal damage to said enemy instead. The collision detection itself is handled by Unity, the engine that Cuphead was made on top of, and when Unity detects that a collision interaction has happened, it will call the appropriate section of code that was written by Cuphead's developers to do whatever it needs to do for the projectile for that type of collision. Now, there seems to be a weird issue where, for whatever reason, when a Lobber bullet or EX move interacts with an enemy or a floor, Cuphead will run that collision code twice. I'm not 100% sure why, but I believe this is probably a bug with Unity itself. Anyway, the Cuphead developers must have taken notice, because before allowing the bullet to pop and potentially deal damage to an enemy, they decided to check for if the bullet has already been popped, and if it has, then it won't allow it to pop again. The problem with our EX move lies in the fact that they seemingly forgot to add this check for part of the code that runs when a Lobber bullet or EX hits the ground. In the case of a Lobber bullet, this is pretty harmless, as it simply results in randomizing its death animation again, but in the case of a Lobber EX, this results in an extra explosion getting generated. So that's how double damage happens. And here ends anything specific to old Cuphead versions. Starting from version 1.2, the call to Cuphead's collision code correctly seems to only happen once, meaning that hitting the floor will only cause one explosion to generate. However, this EX move is still bugged in several ways. Watch what happens if we position ourselves very close to a boss and hit our Lobber EX in between that boss and the floor. That's 56 HP of damage again. How? Well, as you might guess, what happens here is that the Lobber EX is causing both an enemy and a floor interaction on the same frame, and causing both of the relevant parts of collision code to run. So in this example, we're first getting an explosion generated from the code that handles enemy hitbox interactions, and then a second explosion by the code that handles floor hitbox interactions. Sounds simple enough. However, if we actually try hitting this EX move a few times, we'll quickly notice that this double damage method is very inconsistent. What's happening here is that which hitbox interaction ends up being processed first seems random. Sometimes it's the floor hitbox, sometimes it's the enemy hitbox, seemingly a 50% chance of either one. Remember that the code that processes enemy hitbox interactions contains a check that prevents the EX from causing an explosion if it has already done so, while the code that processes floor hitbox interactions is missing this check. So in order to get double damage, the code for processing the enemy hitbox needs to cause the explosion first, otherwise it will see that an explosion has already happened off the floor and skip it. On all Cuphead versions, this is even more powerful, because we're getting 2 explosions off the ground, so this becomes a 50% chance between double damage and triple damage. Unfortunately, this really does seem random. We're not entirely certain what the reason is, but it seems to be in Unity's control and outside of anything the player can influence, so whenever we attempt this type of Lobber EX, we're essentially going to deal random damage, as if this game didn't have enough RNG already. Anyway, all of this already makes the Lobber EX super powerful, and is the main reason this weapon is so good. If it ended here, it would probably already see very heavy use, especially considering its other strengths in the form of flick lobbers and lobber traps. But it doesn't end here. There's even more situations in which we can get extra damage from this EX move. First of all, several bosses have multiple hitboxes active at the same time. In most cases, if we englobe more than one of them in a Lobber EX explosion, they will not take extra damage, but some of them do. That is for example the case for the Gumball Machine in Baroness von Bonbon's fight, the Phantom Express's twins, and the Devil's Eyes in specific portions of his fight. Next, in Guppy Le Grande's fight, there is a pretty unique situation going on. When phase 2 begins, he will play the animation where he grows big, and then begin bouncing around on screen. But the seamless transition is an illusion. His big phase is actually stored off screen the entire time, and right before he starts charging for his first bounce, that hitbox is teleported on screen, replacing the original Guppy that was there. So, by hitting a Lobber EX right before this teleportation happens, we can hit the original hitbox first, and then the new hitbox will teleport into the explosion and take damage as well. To maximize damage, a little earlier than that, we can throw a Lobber EX upwards and then another one between Guppy and the ground. On versions 1.1 and below, this results in quadruple damage from the upwards EX, since we're hitting 2 hitboxes with 2 explosions, and 50% of the time, sextuple damage from the diagonally downwards EX, since we're hitting 2 hitboxes with 3 explosions. On versions 1.2 and above, this results in double and quadruple damage instead, which is still very significant. The same sprite swap actually happens on Werner Berman's fight as well, right before the start of Phase 2. However, in version 1.1, we only really need to hit the diagonal EX in this situation, because we have a different way to get extra damage in this fight anyway. In this phase, Werner's machine comes with its own platform we can stand on. And this is a fully fledged floor that also happens to made up of 2 floor collisions. We can abuse this with our Lobber EXs. By positioning ourselves right up against Werner, we can aim an EX diagonally downwards and have it explode on both of the floor collisions, resulting in quadruple damage on version 1.1 and below. On versions 1.2 and above, this platform is only made up of 1 floor collision, so we only get single damage off of it. But this is not the only spot in the game with overlapping floors. Chef Saul Baker's fight is arguably the fight that's broken the most by the Lobber. In Phase 3, the pavement here on the left side is incredibly made up of 3 overlapping floors, likely due to the animation that normally plays at the end of the phase. So even on version 1.3, which is the only version where this fight can be played on due to it being part of the DLC, a Lobber EX here will deal triple damage. We can combine it with an upwards Lobber EX and get 6 times as much damage as a single Lobber EX explosion. This is already enough to instantly end Phase 3. However, the Lobber allows us to do better than that. By combining a little bit of overdamage from a Salt Shaker in Phase 2, then using Miss Chalice's double jump to set up an insane Lobber trap, and hitting our 2 Lobber EXs right before Phase 3 lands on the floor, we can dish out so much damage that it will instantly finish the fight on the spot, skipping the final phase. This trick is known as Saltime Jutsu, and look, Chef Saul Baker's fight is really complicated and really would deserve a video of its own, but needless to say, this might just be the most insane individual thing that Lobber allows for. But overall, between the weapon itself being a mid-range weapon that deals decent damage, its bouncy properties allowing for the creation of high damage traps for bosses, and the numerous ways that its CX move can deal extra damage, this weapon really has it all. It offers amazing utility while being able to frequently dish out incredible damage. It is still often paired with Spread, as Cuphead does allow equipping 2 weapons per level at once, and that weapon does do quite a bit more damage up close, but Lobber is arguably the best weapon in the game. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, feel free to subscribe to the channel. I'm looking to focus a little more on Cuphead in the near future, as that also happens to be the game I'm actively speedrunning over on Twitch. Also, as of recent, I have a second channel where I've started posted all my speedruns to instead of here, and just a few days ago I've reclaimed the world record in 80% 1.1 plus for the first time since 2019, so if you wanna watch that run, head on over to the channel. Take care everybody.